Okay. Alrighty. So, Kristen Geaman, associate lecturer, is a native of Findlay, Ohio, who completed her undergraduate work at the University of Delaware and her graduate work at the University of Southern California. Ooh, that's cool. Her research focuses on infertility in late medieval England, especially how couples coped with their childlessness after spiritual and medical remedies failed. She has published an English historical review and social history of medicine, and is currently finishing a biography of Anna Bohemia, Queen of England. Yay! So we are very excited. I'll go ahead and let Dr. Geaman take it away.
All right, thank you. Let's see here. All right, so I want to put it in slideshow view, but maybe I need to share it first. Okay, yes, can you see it?
Yes.
All right, okay, there we go. All right, thank you everyone for coming. So yes, talk about infertility and gender identity in medieval England, specifically using the example of Richard II and Anne of Bohemia, who are a king and queen of England. And one of our big problems back in the day for doing older history, of course, is we don't have as many sources about the regular people. So that's why I'll be talking about a king and queen, even though, of course, king and queens were a very tiny percentage of the population. So first, when we start talking about infertility, I always like to refer to what I call the Henry VIII effect. When I first started working on this, and I would tell people, oh, I'm talking about infertility in medieval Europe, almost invariably people would say, oh, wasn't it the wife's fault? Oh, didn't they kill him? And I'm like, okay, you're thinking of Henry VIII, and yes, he did have some issues with this, but Henry VIII is a special case that he, generally speaking, you do not execute your wife when you cannot have a child. And Henry VIII also really blamed his wives for that, and that's some sort of personal things going on with him, changing ideas of kingship, the importance of he was only the second Tudor on the throne, and also that's in the 1500s, and I'm talking a little bit earlier. So in medieval Europe and in medieval England, it was a problem for both men and women. Some of the examples in more everyday literature, a lot of literature is based on stories about, from the Bible. And there's a very famous story about Mary's parents and how they have Mary, Saint Anne, and her husband is Joachim. And what happens is they are old and they can't have a child, so they're praying about it. And in one of the Middle English versions of a sort of Life of the Virgin Mary, Joachim goes to the temple and tries to make an offering, and the guys there all make fun of him, and they're like, "What are you doing here, Joachim? You can't make an offering because you don't have any kids." And he gets really sad and he says, "Oh, I want the arguments of a man, because when men are counted, I am not," because he doesn't have any children. So it wasn't exclusively a woman's problem, but women had a heavier burden to fix the problem. So while it was certainly an issue for men in terms of the kinds of things you could do, you might be expected to do, particularly medically, women did more of that. And to a certain extent, I think that's true. Even today, there are a lot more medical remedies that they try for women than for men. So some of this kind of stuff, how do they even decide if someone's infertile? And also, of course, when I'm doing this stuff about medieval England, I will use the word childlessness or just childless as well, because of course, they use different terms. They use ones that are really not, that we're really not comfortable using nowadays. A lot of my sources will say, "Oh, this person's barren," which is really kind of rude and very intense. So we don't really use that. The way being infertile is defined as nowadays not being able to carry a pregnancy to term after a year of unprotected intercourse. So most people in the Middle Ages are probably having unprotected intercourse. I mean, they do have some things some methods they can use to not conceive, but not, you know, like we have today. And then people might be having miscarriages, and so that counts as being infertile. One of the big things, though, why I also use childless is because the sources don't always record if a woman has a miscarriage. So childless, you can generally tell, particularly for the elites, when the spouses die, if they don't have a child to inherit, well, then that means they were childless. Although it could be that they had a kid and the kid died at 5, or the kid just predeceased them. So that's why when I'm talking in kind of more social history aspect, I try to say childless, but for some of the medical history aspects, they do use terms, you know, like barren, or sometimes they even say sterile, which is really intense. So how, whether you're fertile or not is partially based on some of these medical theories they have at the time about conception. So we have, on the one hand, the 1-seed theory and the 2-seed theory, which both coexist during the Middle Ages, although, as you can see, it says down at the bottom that the 2-seed is more popular. The 1-seed theory is really still kicking around because it is promoted by Aristotle, who is extremely famous in the Middle Ages. He's just referred to as the philosopher, as though he's the only one. He's a very big deal. Aristotle's theory is that men have seed, and that's what creates the baby, and women are just vessels. So the man gives the form, and the women just kind of gives the matter. So if you've ever seen, this is more what they refer to in early modern Europe, but sometimes if you've ever seen pictures of the homunculus, which is like this tiny little human in a sperm, that's based on the 1-seed theory, that, you know, the dad just like shoots the baby in there, and then it kind of just gathers its matter from women. And so women are infinitely less important. And it's environmental factors that determine the sex. So if the mother is too cold, her uterus is too cold, then, or the baby, you know, settles on the left side, then it'll probably become a female. The more popular idea is the 2-seed theory, which comes from Galen, a Roman physician, and he argues that there is seed from men and women. So, I mean, this is, you know, it's an early form of what we know to be accurate, that there is, men and women both have to contribute something, but they just call it seed. And it's from this idea, this 2-seed theory, that you might have heard. It's been kicking around in pop culture, this idea that women have to have an orgasm in order to conceive, because that is what causes them to release their seed. That's kind of unclear if that is, that's kind of what the medical literature says, but of course, whether everybody is, following that, and it has benefits. On the one hand, you think, oh, okay, they have to, do a good job, but it has the negative side that if a woman is raped and conceived, then a lot of legal theory will be like, well, you're not, if you, had your seed, you must not have been raped. But the 2-seed theory is much more popular, and it is really because we can see in the medical stuff about that 2-seed theory, more people are using it, and that's where we can see some of the remedies that people are trying to use. So one of the most famous tests for who is infertile, and this test dates all the way back to ancient Egypt. They found it on, they refer to it as the Egyptian papyri, which means it's been written on papyrus. So the test is, you take 2 pots. The man and the woman each urinate in the pot. You cover it with bran, and you wait 9 to 10 days. And whichever pot has worms means you're the infertile one. I know it seems kind of weird for multiple reasons. One of which is, if you have the worms, doesn't that mean you're like generating something? But that is that is one of the ideas. So just that right there shows that it could, there is that idea that it could be the man's fault. He has to be tested as well. And then that leads to some of the common explanations. And of course, you can see here, there are more on the women's side than the side for the men. So this is one of those spots where we can tell that women have that greater burden of trying to deal with infertility. So for the men, it might be that they have bad seed, and there really isn't anything you can do about it. You can do about that. Their testicles might be too cold. Their testicles might be too dry. This is not cold and dry in the sense that we think of like, well, warm it up or something. But cold and dry, and I'll show you in the visual, the next slide. But cold and dry in this sort of four humors sense, which again dates back to ancient Greek medicine. For women, there's the idea, maybe she's too fat, so she needs to lose weight. Maybe she's too thin, so she needs to gain weight so she can be healthy enough. There is the idea that her womb is too slippery and that the seed that comes in can't catch. She might have bad seed as well, or the idea that there's something wrong and the seed can't be nurtured. So aside from the bad seed, which is just like bummer, the too fat, the too thin, there are things that you can do. The idea that the womb might be slippery, they do have medical texts do have suggestions for what to do. One of the negative ideas about the womb being slippery is that it becomes slippery from too much intercourse. It's like a buildup. So that some arguments like, oh, a prostitute can't conceive. I mean, that's obviously completely untrue. But the idea is like it's too slippery inside. So, the remedy for that would be, you have to abstain for a while and then nurturing the seed. This is where you can get into all sorts of remedies. Oh, try doing this. Try doing that to balance your humors, to make your womb a better place for it. And so that's where we get a lot more of ideas about, oh, these are all kinds of things that women have to do. So then here, when I was talking about it's too cold, it's too dry, this is the humor. It's kind of like a little diagram of the humors. So the four humors are blood, yellow bile, black bile, and phlegm, and they add up to air, fire, earth, water. I mean, that's kind of their real world counterpart. And then they each have two characteristics: hot, dry, cold, and wet. So something like your blood is hot and wet, your yellow bile is hot and dry, your black bile is dry and cold, and phlegm is cold and wet. So that's what they're talking about when they say, oh, maybe you're too dry, oh, maybe you're too cold. And men are considered to be hot and dry, and of course then that means things that are hot and dry are better, whereas women are considered to be cold and wet. So then a lot of remedies for women will involve, oh, okay, well, now we need to have to eat dry food. You have to eat warm food that kind of, like zests you up and makes you warmer on the inside. So it's about balancing those humors. So it's because, you probably heard about bloodletting. So it is that idea that bloodletting, if you have if you are too hot and wet, maybe bloodletting by letting that humor out will help balance in there. And it's mostly bloodletting because, of course, like yellow bile and black bile is like in your stomach and in your liver, and it, you can't really get in there like do some bile letting from your liver. So it pretty much bloodletting is about the only thing they have. So it's in trying to balance those humors that's where they get their ideas about infertility and some of the remedies that they can make for that. And some of those infertilities will include things like like medicine that will warm you up. And later on, I have a specific remedy that Anne might have taken. So that is kind of some quick background on why infertility can be a problem for both men and women, and so why I'm going to look at both Richard and Anne, because at first glance you might think, oh, it must have been Anne's problem and Richard got off scot-free, a la Henry VIII, and that's actually not true. And one interesting thing is when it comes to Richard and Anne, Richard sort of got in more trouble, had more difficulties with it than Anne did. And of course, this is part of a much larger issue with Richard and Anne as individuals. Richard II is one of the kings of England that is deposed. So he obviously had numerous problems, and being unable to have a child was just one of many, but it certainly did not help him at all. And Anne, his wife, was liked much better than Richard. So that probably plays into it somewhat, but it also this is kind of tapping into discourses, ideas they had in late medieval England about gender as well. So before we get to that, here's some images. So on the left-hand side, this is from a manuscript that is at Westminster Abbey now. It's known as the Liber Regalis, the royal book. It includes a lot of stuff about the coronation. And this picture is thought to represent Richard and Anne. And then on the right-hand side, that is an image from their tomb. Richard and Anne have the first double tomb among royalty in England. Anne predeceases Richard, and Richard specifically has this tomb crafted where they are depicted laying side by side and holding hands. So this is one of the other things is initially you might be thinking, well, and there are definitely instances. I have a colleague who studies medieval Spain, and in Aragon in the 1400s, there's a childless couple. And one of the big reasons that they're childless is probably because they get married and then the husband goes off to Italy and pretty much spends the entire time in Italy, in southern Italy, which is part of the kingdom, and his wife is back in Spain. And go figure, they don't have a kid because it's kind of hard to have a child when you're not in the same place. There are other instances where couples hate each other, and go figure, they don't end up having kids. But one of the things that makes Richard and Anne interesting to study is, by all accounts in the sources, they were the opposite. They really liked each other. It wasn't arranged marriage, of course, but they were both pretty much the same age, 15, when they got married, and they spent most of their time together. We don't have a lot of individual household records for Anne because it seems, well, either they were destroyed partially, but that she spent a lot of time with Richard. And Richard was so upset when she died that later on he had part of the castle where she died torn down, because so he has sort of a big expressions of grief. So did they hate each other? Can't be a reason why they didn't have any children. It would seem that they were trying and it wasn't working out. And what were some of the issues they had with it not working out? And this is where we particularly come to some of that gender identity stuff. So this again is Richard II. Richard II was very into his image, which will come up in another slide and in one of his coping strategies. This is a portrait that again is now in Westminster Abbey. That it's probably near the end of his life. But Richard commissioned this portrait, and really until the Tudors, until people like Henry VIII, you don't have that many kings of England commissioning portraits. Richard II is one of the few medieval kings that we have a pretty good idea of what he individually looked like, because he had so much art done of himself. And a lot of other English kings, they're depicted, but they're just depicted as kind of, generic man sort of thing. All right, so Richard cares about about his image. He has a problem projecting his mature manhood. And there's a couple of reasons for this, and infertility or childlessness definitely plays into it. So one of the things, of course, is Richard does come to the throne as a child. So of course, that's one problem. And then he kind of never fully gets the chance to grow up. He becomes king in 1377 when he's 10, and in the late 1380s, so right around the time when he's 20, and then 1388, 89, where he's becoming, 21, 22, there is this big political dust up where power is taken from him by some of his nobles, and one of the big ways they justify that is by saying, oh, the king is surrounded by bad counselors. That's a very typical medieval sort of thing. It's always blame the counselors, but they partially justify as, oh, the king had these bad counselors because he was young and he didn't know any better. And so we're going to step in and fix it up for him, and it'll be fine. This, of course, comes right around the time when Richard is turning 21, which is when he officially gets his majority in the Middle Ages. So it is quite, it's an insult for a number of reasons. One, you're taking my power away. Two, you are telling me I'm a child right at the very instance when I am becoming a man, on paper, by my age. And also, he's already married, and a number of his relatives, including his grandfather, who he succeeded, his grandfather also became king when he was a child of 14, and he had a regent, and his grandfather, Edward III, seized power from the people who were ruling from him around the time that he was 18, which is also coincidentally coincides with when his eldest son was born. So the idea that getting married and having a family makes you socially a man, even if you are under the age of 21, the sort of official age where you can inherit your land if you are in the knightly class, is pretty well established in medieval Europe. So Richard's kind of on the cusp of that, and his enemies are very much taking advantage of the idea that he is still young, and he also is missing some of those cultural signs of manhood, and that continues then even to the end of his life. So Richard is deposed in 1399. He's deposed by his cousin Henry IV, who is the exact same age, if not a couple of months younger. But Henry happens to have a lot of kids. He has at least 5 or 6 kids. At least 4 of them are sons. And in Parliament, when there is one of the Archbishop of Canterbury, Archbishop Arundel, is giving a sermon trying to hype everybody up, isn't it great that we just kicked our king off the throne? And one of the comments, he is expanding on the biblical quote that woe unto the land where a child is king. And he's saying, and now, not as it was beforehand, children have lordship in the realm. But the Lord, in this case means God, says to you that a man, meaning Henry, shall have lordship and dominion on you. So Richard and Henry are both 33. At this time, there's really no way, numerically, to claim that they are not men. And of course, Henry is a man, even though he's the same age, if not a little bit younger than Richard. But Richard is not a man. And one of the big things that plays into that idea that he is not a man is that he is missing those kind of socio-cultural trappings of manhood. He doesn't have and he doesn't have any children. He isn't really sort of like the ruler of his household. At this point, Anne is dead, and Richard does have a wife, but his wife is a child. She is 10 years old at the time, so that's also not helping the case. So it's just one of these big things that hangs over Richard, as he is very much missing some of these important signals that I have become a man, an important signal to his masculinity. This is not to say that Richard doesn't try to deal with that. He does make some attempts, I would argue, to kind of explain away why he doesn't yet have a child, and explain it in a way that shores up his masculinity. So again, when we talk about masculinity in the Middle Ages, we like to talk about masculinities, plural. And I was mentioning how Richard is considered not to have mature manhood. So it is not that he is seen as womanly or something for not having children. He's seen as youthful and as not mature, so he's not wise enough. So that is kind of some knocks against him being king. So one of the ways that Richard, after Anne's death, tries to promote the idea that he is a mature, kingly man is through the idea of chaste marriage. So chaste marriage is, like what it sounds like. Chaste marriage is that you get married and you're completely chaste. You don't have any intercourse. So obviously there won't be children, because like people know that's how you get babies. So if you're not doing what it takes to get babies, you're not going to have any children. This is a legitimate form of marriage in medieval Europe. It's widely considered that this is the kind of marriage that Jesus's earth parents, Mary and Joseph, had. So it is, definitely an okay type of marriage. It's one of those things, though, that you really mostly only hear about it in the sources sort of after the fact. So it was probably frequently used essentially as a cover up, as sort of, oh yes, we didn't have any children. Well, that's because we weren't trying. So why would chaste marriage help Richard, and how do we know that he was trying to do that? So one of the big things is chaste marriage allows Richard to type into another type of masculinity. In medieval Europe, it's a bit different from now. It is considered that women are much more sexually voracious and cannot keep themselves from sex, where men can, because they're much more logical and rational and less emotional and all those sorts of stereotypes. So the idea that you would be a virgin is not having intercourse is seen as extremely manly. It's very masculinizing because it shows how much self-control you have. And so then this idea of self-control is also a mark of maturity. So one of the things about youths is, like they're, subject to misrule, they pick bad friends, and they don't have, they're bad with responsibility, they don't have kids to take care of, this kind of thing. So if you're a man who, has a wife and kids to take care of, oh, look at you being responsible and mature. If you don't, chaste marriage or swearing to virginity, this is a saintly type of masculinity that shows what a strong, mature man you are by how much self-control you have, by how you can be chaste. So this gives, by trying to tap into that idea of masculinity, that would give Richard a chance to shore up his identity. How he tries to do that then is through his devotion to a major English saint, particularly a royal saint named Edward the Confessor. Edward the Confessor was second to last Anglo-Saxon king of England right before the conquest, and he was widely considered to have had a chaste marriage. Probably he did not have a chaste marriage, but after his death without children, his wife hired a guy to write a life of her husband, in which he promoted, oh, hey, this guy had a chaste marriage. By the late, that's in the 1000s. By the late 1100s, Edward the Confessor has been canonized, so that means he is a saint. And part of his claim to sainthood is that he was a virgin, that he was married and, never had intercourse. So that shows just how saintly and masculine he was. And one of the big ways that Richard shows that he is kind of trying to follow in the confessor's footsteps is with the image that's on this slide. So this is a coat of arms, and in this, Richard he is sharing his coat of arms. His quartering is referred to as coat of arms with the coat of arms of the confessor. So when you're looking at the screen, the left-hand side, the side that has the cross and the doves on it, that's considered to be Edward the Confessor's coat of arms. It's made up. He didn't actually have one, but by the 1300s, that was widely seen as his coat of arms. Actually, they still use it at Westminster Abbey. And then on the right, the one that has the 3 leopards, they look like lions, but they call them leopards. And then the little fleur-de-lis, that is the arms of the kings of England at that moment in time. So normally you only quarter arms if, like, the kings of England added their arms with France when they were like, we're also kings of France, which is a different story. Or then other times, maybe women would do it when they moved in, married into a new family, and were trying to express both kinds. So in his shield, Richard is essentially kind of heraldically marrying himself to Edward the Confessor with this. So it's a very potent visual symbol that he doesn't start using until 1395. Anne dies in 1394. Richard gets remarried to a child in 1396. So on the one hand, Richard does at the end of his life have a chaste marriage, but he is also kind of trying to retrospectively suggest that he had a chaste marriage, and then that is one way to shore up his masculinity. There's actually been, if you get into Richard II, just take my word for it, there's been a lot of debate among modern scholars, like, hey, did they really have a chaste marriage? What do you think the odds are about that? Really kind of going deep into all of this Edward the Confessor stuff. But when you go back and look at the primary sources from the 1300s, yes, Richard is doing this, but nobody seems to be buying it. There's a guy named Philippe de Mézières who writes a letter to Richard saying, yeah, it'd be great if you married the French princess. It'll be awesome. And in it, he says, you're a king, you need to get married. You're not a virgin anymore. That's too bad, but it's okay. You're not a virgin because you were married. And that's why you're not a virgin. So this is a guy who, is a contemporary with Richard. Contemporaries do not see, they know Richard is into Edward the Confessor, but they are not really buying the chaste marriage idea. But it's an option for you if you happen to be part of a childless couple, and particularly for the man, if you want to shore up your masculinity, to show yourself as mature and having a lot of self-control. You can be like, I didn't even try because I'm so holy and saintly. Look how awesome I am. And then that brings me to Anne and how it seems to have affected her in a lesser way. So Richard had some issues with his maturity. Childlessness was just one thing that contributed to it. I don't want to sound like it was the only reason. We're not really into that. In history, there's no sort of, just like one reason, but it's definitely something that is not helping him project, adequate kingship and adequate mature manhood. For his wife, Anne, and we have here something, I know it's a little weird looking, it's just a head, but this is part of her tomb effigy. So this is the part that was like paraded around London after she died, so that people could come out and see her and be like, oh, that's really sad that the queen is dead. And then it was, displayed in Westminster Abbey for a while. So Anne comes out of this issue with her womanhood largely intact. So I do use the term womanhood because Chaucer, who's writing around the same time, he's a contemporary, an older contemporary of Richard and Anne. He is kind of coining the term womanhood right around this the same time, and he is applying it to Anne. So Anne is still able to project adequate womanhood. And there are a number of reasons for this. One of them is something that will probably not surprise anyone. There is, of course, very much a gender hierarchy in medieval England, and masculinity, various forms of masculinity, you know, being a sort of mature, dominant man as opposed to a youth, is at the top. And femininity is, or womanhood is definitely subordinate to masculinity. So there's one issue is Anne does not have to achieve womanhood in quite the same way that it seems Richard is having to achieve his manhood, because femininity is, you know, it's the subordinate status. So there is less, you know, action, active kind of stuff that needs to go into that. So there's that reason. There's also the idea that there are multiple ways in medieval Europe for you to be a mother. So this ties in then with, you know, Anne's identity as a woman, and then also her identity as a queen. There are other ideas about motherhood that Anne and others can tap into. And one of those big ideas is, instead of biological motherhood, is the idea of nurturing motherhood. And so this is very prominently displayed by Anne through something known as intercession. And intercession is when you mediate on behalf of somebody else. So it's very common in medieval England that the queen will intercede with the king for various subjects. Somebody will say, oh, I really want a pardon, and she will help someone get a pardon. Or she will help politically. Anne receives letters from, you know, other kings, popes, sometimes saying, hey, you know, this is what we're trying to accomplish. If you could help us out by, you know, working on your husband from your end, that would be just dandy. And of course, this very much ties in with the Virgin Mary, who is seen in this period as the Queen of Heaven, and is also seen as the #1 intercessor because she's the mom of Jesus. So this is this idea that, oh yeah, I mean, even Jesus listens to his mom. So if you are, you know, an intercessor, you are acting as this sort of nurturing mother. And honestly, that's even kind of seen to a certain extent as better, because this nurturing maternal role anyone can take on. And there are some famous monks, for instance, Bernard of Clairvaux, who writes before Anne, he's in the 1100s. He writes things about Jesus as a mother, and sort of tapping into this discourse of motherhood, as, you know, like, I'm, you know, an abbot, I'm mothering my monk, sort of thing, in a nurturing way. So of course, nurturing motherhood, you know, that is, yes, technically, yes, Mary is Jesus's biological mother, but they're really emphasizing with the nurturing aspect, or with the intercession, the nurturing aspect. And so nurturing motherhood is something that anybody can do, including men. So of course, since, you know, men can do it, that makes it, you know, like kind of better than just plain old biological motherhood. Plus, there are sometimes fears that, you know, biological motherhood does give women a certain amount of power. You know, in previous centuries in England, somebody like Eleanor of Aquitaine, she was a biological mother to a number of future kings, and that made her very powerful. She had an extremely close relationship with, in particular, her son Richard the First, who ended up rebelling against his dad, and, you know, causing some trouble. Don't feel too bad for Richard's dad, Henry II, because he captured Eleanor and imprisoned her for like 10 years in a castle. So, don't feel bad for him. But this idea that the power you get through being a biological mother can sometimes be seen as threatening. But the nurturing aspect, you're trying to make it better for somebody else. Also, anybody can do it. That makes it sort of, widely appealing and less threatening to the power hierarchy. So engaging in that is one of the many ways that she can uphold her womanhood. It is an ideal form of womanhood to intercede for others, even though she doesn't have children. So she's essentially being a good woman in all the ways she can, aside from having children. Then getting back to some of that medical kind of stuff. So Anne, with the chaste marriage, also just to prove that it doesn't really make sense that a royal couple would not try to have children. And also, a few years ago when I was first started working on this, I found an apothecary bill, so basically like a pharmacist bill, that dates from the end of Anne's life. She dies in June 1394. It's from the last year of her life. That includes a number of remedies that can be used for conception. So this, I would argue, suggests that even until the end of their life, Richard and Anne are trying to, achieve that big thing. We want to have an heir. And one of the big things in this bill is a compound medicine that was particularly used for rich people because it has a lot of fancy, expensive ingredients in it, referred to as called Trifera Magna. And Trifera Magna in a number of medieval apothecary texts is considered to confer great utility to women and makes them fruitful. So I'd say it's suggestive that, and again, kind of tying back, we don't seem to have clear evidence of Richard taking medicine to make him fertile. He does seem to have had other problems like dealing with kidney stones, but Anne, there is a pretty powerful indication that she is taking medicine even up to the end of her life to make her fruitful. So there is that idea to balance her humors and her taking a little bit bigger share of the burden. So then finally, to wrap it all up, some of my main takeaways: infertility is a male problem too. In terms of trying to fix it, it's obviously a bigger problem for someone like Richard. This probably ties in with a lot of the other issues that Richard has. So I would hesitate to say blanket statement like, oh yeah, it's always a bigger problem for the men. But I think it's because we see with Henry VIII it's not. But I think it's important to know that it also isn't always more of an issue for the woman. Infertility can be a male problem. This very much issues of not having children ties in with ideas about gender, but also how gender relates to power, because part of the reason that it doesn't seem to have harmed Anne as much is because she was in a subordinate state. You can't really fall lower down the hierarchy, so to speak, when you're already in the lowest gender category. And then finally, Anne was a good woman, and she was widely considered a good queen because, despite not being a biological mother, because she enacted these other ways of being a mother, mainly of nurturing people around her. So motherhood is still important to womanhood, and it's still important to queenship, but it doesn't have to be biological motherhood. It can be any of a variety of ways of mothering. And that's it.
Thank you so much, Dr. Geaman. That was a great presentation. I will open it up to any questions from the audience. Anything for her? I think I have a couple questions, but I want to give people a chance.
All right. Thanks for listening. Angie, are you raising your hand? Oh, okay. So, I saw. Oh, okay. Thanks.
So, from your presentation, it kind of sounds like men were more blamed about infertility issues than women. Is that a correct reading? Because I feel like,
no, I would say, it intersects with a lot of other things, in that I think not having a child could harm your manhood, potentially more than it could harm your womanhood. But in terms of, like, if we don't have a kid and somebody needs to be, like doing the medicine, or I didn't talk about pilgrimages and that kind of thing, that definitely seems to be more pushed onto the woman, that she has to do those kinds of things. So yeah, I would say, yeah, I wouldn't want to go so far as that it is more the man's problem. I think that's when it comes to gender identity issues, it can be a little bit trickier, simply because there are more things for men to achieve, and of course it also has to do with your social status, as well. Another issue about masculinity is, of course, there's kind of clerical ways of being masculine, and there's people in the city, kind of town dwellers, peasants' way of being masculine. And there's even been some studies, how do kings enact their masculinity? And so it's very much an issue, kind of intersecting with, he's a king, he's elite, in the top, he's the top of the top, of the pyramid. So there's a lot writing on that. But some of the stuff about, in the stories that present about Mary's parents, in that it is kind of, he's not a king, he's more kind of cast as like an everyman, and that story is presented in Middle English, so that makes it more accessible to kind of gentry classes and your literate classes in the cities. It certainly is a problem for him, but it's definitely also a problem for his wife as well.
So I had a couple questions, I guess, but my main one, he had gotten remarried, correct?
Yes.
So he never had children with his next marriage either.
No. So Richard gets married at in November of 1396 to a French princess, Isabella, who is 6 at the day of their wedding and turns 7 the next day. So it is not expected that she would have kids for a while. So that's how I can say, like, yeah, he did have a chaste marriage, because okay, I mean, yes, I don't 100% know that, but in the Middle Ages, it was considered that you can get married younger if there's a parent's permission. You can't consummate there, like when a woman turns 12, or with a boy if he gets married young, 14, the age of puberty, then you kind of have to reaffirm your consent to the marriage. And so then that, of course, is when they could have maybe, I mean, depending on her, biologically tried to have children, but Richard was deposed and dead before she reached that point. So
my next question was there anything that just like really surprised you in the research that you found?
I would say some of that stuff about how men were, because I definitely like kind of went into it maybe a little bit with, oh man, was it only women's fault? And so I was happy, I guess, to see that they kind of that there was this idea that men could cause the problem, but that's where I forgot. With that two seed theory, though, that women in some of the gynecological texts in particular, they refer to it as women having a double fault because women have seed, and so the seed could be messed up or their womb could be inhospitable. So it's like, the guy's only doing one thing, so he only has half as much fault as the wife. So that didn't entirely surprise me. I think the other thing that was good that I like was some of the remedies that they talk about do kind of make sense. I mean, if you are too thin, I mean, that can obviously be a problem if you are not healthy enough to conceive. So they do have a lot of ideas about that. They did understand that you needed to menstruate in order to conceive. Now, they did not understand the exact connection between menstruation and conception, but they thought it was very important because for the purgative aspects, again, that sort of balancing humors, is sort of thing that you needed to menstruate pretty regularly to purge yourself of like toxins, essentially. But then this is a fun fact. Students always love this because it's very is blood is a really important substance in medieval medicine. And then there is this idea that because you do not menstruate when you are pregnant, the heat of the pregnancy is purifying that blood into your breast milk, and so that is why you are not menstruating, is because you are saving it up and using it for something else. And then it kind of parallels with, they see male seed essentially as purified blood. So it's like they understand breast milk is not the same thing, but both have it going on. And it's men, because men are hotter and drier, they can do that with their blood, and women can't. But when they're pregnant, they're like, get a little bit hotter and drier, and then they can make breast milk. So that was fun. And I like, maybe not totally surprising, but some of the other remedies are very, what we would refer to as sympathetic magic, where it's like, who has lots of babies? Rabbits. So they say, get a rabbit. Unfortunately, you have to kill the rabbit because you have to get its reproductive organs out of the rabbit, and then you dry them, and then you powder it up and you put it in wine and you drink it. I don't think that would work. Whereas, I think if they say, you're too skinny, you need to eat some more food, I think that would work to help you become pregnant. But I don't think, eating the rabbit uterus is probably going to work. But, it's interesting to think about. And obviously they were observing the natural world and realized, hey, rabbits have a lot of babies.
Gotcha. Very interesting. Yeah, it's very interesting to hear about some of the methods that they had and all that.
So yeah, I think it's fun because, of course, there are so many things they do that you're like, that's ridiculous. But there are also things in there that you realize, that actually does kind of make sense. And it's definitely a somewhat more holistic, not entirely accurate, but they definitely do have a more holistic idea. So I'm certainly not advocating that we should go back to medieval medicine ideas, but I know people who are interested in kind of, holistic medicine kind of things, preventative care. I mean, they are kind of going a little more in that direction in the Middle Ages, because of course, they don't have the same kind of medicines like we have.
Gotcha. Okay. Well, thank you so much, Dr. Geaman, for this awesome presentation.
Thanks for having me.
I learned so much today about medieval England that I just, like I said, I didn't really know a whole lot, so I was really excited for this. Thank you so much.
Thank you guys. It was all. Thank you all. It was great.
Yeah. I did put a survey down. I think we had our person that's not Eberly Center leave. So, but anyways, I hope everybody has a great rest of your day. Thank you so much for coming, and thank you again, Dr. Geaman.
Thank you.